between Milosevic, the butcher of Balkans, and very incapable opposition, where we really found some ways, and this is what relates to your story. And we, since then, worked in 46 now different countries, and these numbers change because we get more and more invitations to work with. And we definitely try to understand, because every single struggle is different, what are these dots which are connecting this struggle. This leads us to organizing versus mobilizing dilemma. So when you look at the organizational principles, we were cutting down these things. And we were looking at Gandhi, we were looking at Martin Luther King, all the way through Lech Walesa to Serbia to contemporary movement. There are like three holy trinity of principles in successful movement. If you want to win, you must have unity. There is no such thing as a spontaneous and successful nonviolent revolutions. These revolutions are planned. They must have vision, they must have strategy, they must carefully select tactics. I would, more than all, go along with this idea of nonviolent discipline. There is a recent study of Maria Stefan and Erika Shenovich showing that 56% of nonviolent struggles from 19,000 to 2006 were successful, comparing to only 26% of violent struggles. So people of Syria, when they pick firearms, they actually cut efficiently their chances to win by half. Even worse, 5 years after the change, there is like 4% of chances to end up in democracy with Libyan or Syrian scenario, very unlike 46% of chances when we talk about the nonviolent campaigns. So these are things we know, these are statistics. There are many dilemmas. When you look at the movements, like the Gandhi one, Martin Luther King one, you can look at whether the movements need a charismatic leader or more dispersed leadership is required. Whether we are talking about the figures who unite the movement, like Aung San Suu Kyi on a very basic and symbolic level, or Nelson Mandela sitting in Robben Island, or we use the elements of group identity, symbols, slogans, values, like in anti-war movement, Otpor, Egyptian movement, where we have this literally leaderless revolutions. You can also look at a more centralized structure, like the party structure or the campaign structure, versus more decentralized structure of contemporary movements. So these are some dilemmas we're observing. We can discuss this a little bit later. There is also another things which we are trying to observe, which are these sparkles which are creating this mobilization. Social scientists spend a lot of time focusing on conditions. They say you can't have the successful nonviolent social movement if the regime is too oppressive, if the internet penetration is too low, if the educational rate is less than 3%, and then you name it, you have it. And we say no, emotions count. Yeah. Because what really mobilizes people, what sparkles through the community, is about the emotions. And this is why people join this movement, at least in our experience and our very modest expertise. And then we look at this emotional level, where is it coming from, and how do people affiliate with this movement. We come to the very simple fact. Movements become very effective when they become personal. Whether this is the big emotional trigger, the assassination of Aquino, the assassination of a Lebanese prime minister, the assassination of the Serbian prime minister, these are the big emotional shocks which can sometimes move society towards being mobilized. Then it is becoming personal. This is whether there is something in this movement for everybody and what. And like in the case of election fraud, it is between me and the government. Then it is about the dignity. One of the things you can hear from Arab Spring Street was, we know that the regime was very bad, but being so corrupted and rich while the people are very poor, it's not right. So it is the difference between bad and not right. It leads to this peer pressure. Second very important thing, we examine the role of humor. And there is this term we try to define, which is called leftivism. More and more, when you look at these contemporary movements, they are not very serious. They are people having fun. And there are three reasons why humor is particularly efficient. It brings people to your movement, making it cool. It also helps build down the fear, very important in oppressive regimes. At the end of the day, it also makes a very big dilemma for opponents. These big guys are watching themselves too much on the TV and on billboards. They start taking themselves too seriously. When you mock them, they make stupid mistakes. In Russia recently, there was a toy protest. Police banned the toy protest. Officially, 100 Kinder Surprise toys, 100 Lego people, 20 model soldiers, 10 toy ban from protests because they're not citizens of Russia. So this is only one example. At the end of the day, the big story about the new media, I have a friend here in the audience, David Reisner, putting together a book about the role of new media in Arab Spring, you were witnessing the titles like Facebook Revolution, Twitter Revolution, stuff like that. I think it's very important. It makes things faster. It makes people learn faster from each other. 17,000 downloads of our book in June 2009 in Iran. Can you imagine the attempt of trying to distribute the physical books in a place like Iran? And it also makes things a little bit safer. But we don't want to over-exaggerate the role and lead us to collectivism. The nonviolent struggles are won on the streets of cities, and they're won by real activists in the real world, not in the virtual world. That was me. Thank you. 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks, Sergey. Whoa, there's a lot to talk about here, huh? I mean, one of the clear tensions, I mean, there's a little bit about the inside-outside, but there really is this thing about mobilizing for action and then, and being successful, but then it goes away. And how to have it not go away seems to be sort of what a lot of the big issue is. And are there ways to mobilize that create conditions that create a foundation for it not going away? Or is this just the nature of the beast? Is it always just going to go away? What are the choices kind of here? Because we've heard several different accounts. They're all really interesting, all successful in important ways, but also many limited in important ways. And so I think this is kind of what we want to learn from and engage with. And again, I just want to thank all our panelists. I mean, what a wonderful range of experience. So we want to give the first opportunity for questions and comments to the panel itself, and then we'll open up to everybody. So who on the panel would like to, yeah, Max.
I have a question for Sergey. So it's actually related to what Marshall just was talking about. But I mean, my sense is that, you know, it's much easier in certain respects when you have a clear target to hold a movement together. And then in the transition phase, moving towards having kind of, you know, normal democratic participation, it's much more difficult to hold together the diverse coalition that you initially organize. And certainly Occupy was very different from that in many respects, but I think there are inherent tensions of, you know, a large coalition and undefined targets is something that I'm familiar with. So I'd just be interested to hear you talk a little bit about how do you deal with, you know, keeping folks together when the target falls?
Well, I mean, we are in no means experts on transition, but this is a three-step process. First, there is a democratic revolution, great social mobilization, dealing with the bad guy. Then you prevent the coup, because most organized groups, like Muslim Brotherhood and military, they will step in when the government is on the streets. And then, of course, you elect the democratic government on free and fair elections, and then here comes the endless process of building democratic institutions. Of course, you can't say about the different examples, but watching at Serbia, which after 12 years has a reasonably successful transition, I think there are particularly three very important things. First, we knew what we want very early in the process. That was not to get rid of Milosevic. That was one step. We wanted to go into EU, we wanted a peace with neighbors, we wanted a set of freedoms. Now, 12 years afterward, you see the power of it. The government has changed, but the general role is going on. Sorry, you wanted to ask something?
Saying we, who do you mean?
Who's we?
Serbs. We the Serbs. And then second thing is there is this idea that you may lose the momentum. And I think the maintaining unity throughout the reform is a very difficult task, especially if your only unifying guy is the guy whom you are going to bring down. And now the Mubarak is not there, and groups leave the square. There is also another mistake, proclaiming victory too early in the process. You say, the guy's not there, game over, let's go home. So I mean, understanding that this is a long-term three-step process is very complicated thing, and especially for the movement which is struggling for survive. But the sooner you come to this idea, the better are the chances you will end up in some kind of the democracy.
That's really interesting. Lila?
Well, I just would comment that I think what I've always been a bit angered about with the Egyptians is that they stood up and they called for the downfall of Mubarak, and then when the military said, okay, he's gone away and we're the executive authority, everyone said, yes, this is great, we accept, we love the army because, you know, they didn't fire on us and they're one with us. And that was a very strategic error, right? So, and then you say, we Serbs, we knew what we wanted, right? But what was it that allowed you to know what you wanted before you actually went to the streets?
10 years of
And-
mistakes. 10 years of attempting and failure.
But, and then did you have a common platform? I mean, was it written down? I mean,
Absolutely.
how do you build that consensus?
This is called vision of tomorrow, and you make it very early in the process. I mean, when you look at the successful movements, like South African movement, Charter of Freedom, was there very early in the process, even before they made this stupid mistake and went into guerrilla movement, but it served as a constitutional platform for the new South Africa. 1998, we gathered together the students group and opposition leader about a platform for future Serbia, and it contained these things. And this vision is very important because it is reminding future leaders what they need to do. So there is a trick in this. What we were using our movement, because we were not running for the elections, once the Milosevic was down, to put the pressure from day one on the new government in delivering these goals. And we were easily say this is about having an accountable government, and this is, by the way, what you need to deliver. So we were kind of continuously pressuring the new authorities. But Serbs are very slow learners. We tried Occupy 992, we occupied the student square. We tried 100 days of walking every day in 96, 97, made Milosevic recognize the stolen local elections, and then the opposition fell apart. And then we understood that if opposition is not united, it will be the part of the problem, not the part of the solution. So unfortunately, we learned on our stupid mistakes, but that's the best way to learn. The good news is that other groups can learn from our stupid mistakes.
Well, it also sounds like there must have been an organizational venue, a place where that learning went on, and people among whom it went on, so that there could be learning. I mean, is that accurate?
Well, I mean, if you look at this is an overall generation. Opposition was learning, students were learning. It was going on and on, but it was opposite. We decided to create an out-of-party movement, and this is what connects Otpor with organizations like Occupy Wall Street or April 6 in Egypt or whatsoever Girifna. You will hear about these guys. They happen to be the biggest threat to Sudanese regime as we speak now. These people, they are the bacteria which developed in a political vacuum between the incapable and evil government and opposition which didn't respond to the demands of the people. So this is ideal political place for such movements. Depending on how you want to organize it, it can be this group of students organizations. At the end of the day, it tends like a broad coalition of students, civil rights organizations, and political parties. But it starts generally as a very small group of people.
Anybody else on the panel?
I think that,
And we'll open up in just a minute.
I think part of what we're talking about here is sort of like the movement aspect, and it sounds like a movement consists of both, organizing and mobilization. And clearly, in the case of Serbia, there was organizing before there was even mobilization. In a lot of cases, I think, and especially Occupy, for example, there's like mobilization before there's organization. And I think, mobilization happens to be a really blunt instrument. It's really hard to be nuanced about your messaging and about what you're hoping to achieve. And I think the organizing is what helps you get to a place where you can actually have demands and political power.
That's very helpful. I mean, what would you say to that?
No, definitely. One of the moments we knew we had failed in our organizing effort was that we discussed actually during the strategic teaching workshop. Actually, we just froze our strategy and our messaging. So we had no feedback loops from the ground. We just say, okay, now you just say this, and you only do this, and we do this for the last 2 months, and it's over. So no, you're right.
It's very interesting. So organization as foundation building for mobilization, as opposed to the question of, oh, we mobilized, now how do we organize? I mean, it's
Well,
very, very interesting.
But I think the sequence is actually interesting because I think in some cases it's worked the other way around, and I don't have one off the top of my head, but I think you need a mobilizing moment and some urgency to actually turn people out in a way that brings emotion into it. People see people on the street and it matters. It brings something out in them. It brings out a need to feel like a movement, and it brings out a need to feel like they're part of something larger than themselves. And I think that's what gets people to the table. Then you organize them.
But it is interesting to reflect on organizations like the success of the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, that had organized under very constrained conditions for many, many, many years in many countries, and when the opportunity then presented, had the foundation from which to act.
Yeah, I think that points to one of the challenges, though, and something I was trying to get at with my question to Sergey was just, what's the identity around which you're organizing or the problem